Welcome. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene had a tumultuous journey to publication, including the death of Karl Reinhardt, the man who found and purchased the pages of the Gospel in a shop in Cairo in 1896. After his death, the Gospel was subject to flooding and 2 world wars, which delayed its publication until it finally came to us in its fullest form in 1955. And indeed, 2 other copies of the Gospel, smaller fragments, were found and published within that time frame. Yet still, in 2025, this Gospel, with some of the most sensational teachings that we hear from Jesus, is still not that well known. People are still more taken with the great find at Nag Hammadi, with the texts like the Gospel of Philip that state that Jesus loved Mary Magdalene the most and used to kiss her often on the lips. With that kind of sensationalism, maybe a gospel that, although has sensational teachings, doesn't have that juicy sex sells element to it, is just not that forward in the minds of the public. This gospel is so important, in my opinion, because it gives us a window into a very early branch of Christianity, before Christianity even had that name or a structure. It's dated to around the 1st or 2nd century, so we know that it was pretty close to the time of the events of Jesus, his death, his life, his resurrection. And we also know that because this was underground, it was buried, nobody knew about it, it's not gone through the same sort of editing and cherry picking that the rest of the texts of the Bible we know have been through to some extent. This was also before the Roman Empire, the early church fathers, the Council of Nicaea and other councils, where it was decided which writings were going to make up the Bible and which were not going to make the cut. And we know those early church fathers went for a message that centered around control through fear. So you're innately bad and you need saving, and the only way that you can be saved is by coming to church, going through a priest, going through Jesus to get to God, a heaven. So endure the sufferings of this earth, and then eventually you'll be rewarded if you're good, if you do what we say. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene does not have that message. Indeed, it is quite radical in the message that it shares. It differs from the 4 main Gospels of the Bible in that it does not concentrate on the life and times of Jesus. And so actually many scholars are reluctant to call it a gospel or say that it isn't a gospel, but for convenience, we're going to call it the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene is set after the death and resurrection of Jesus, and in it he shares the truths of the world. He tells us that sin is not real, that hell is not a thing, and he shares a process with us to overcome the sufferings on this earth because we live through our egos and the suffering that creates, and instead how we can live from our souls, get in touch with our true selves, the part of us that is fully human and fully divine, so that we can bring about heaven on earth, that it's not somewhere we aspire to get to once we die, we can bring it down here with us. And this process is described by Jesus's closest confidant, Mary Magdalene. Unfortunately, in all 3 copies of the Gospel that we have, the first 6 pages are missing, so we pick up partway through this exchange between Jesus and his disciples, where he is explaining the nature of matter. He says that every modelled form will dissolve again into their own proper root. So we can interpret this as saying that when matter reaches the end of its life, it goes back to the root of itself. And when it comes to human beings, what is at our root? Is it our divine nature? Do we dissolve back into the divine from where we came? And then Peter says, what is the sin of the world? And Jesus says, there is no such thing as sin. You create sin when you act according to your adulterous nature. So here he's saying that sin is not inherent. We are not inherently sinful. We are not inherently bad. We just have a tendency to act according to our adulterous nature. Now, this doesn't mean we have a tendency to cheat on our spouses, although That's not nice. He's saying that we have a tendency to introduce things that are outside of our true nature. And we can see that humans have this tendency to do things that are not good for us, right? We do things like we smoke, or we drink, or we eat badly, or we treat ourselves badly, or we treat others badly. But what this is suggesting is that that's not our true nature. Our true nature is the opposite of that, perhaps, that we are innately good. So it's not this message that you are innately sinful and you need saving from yourself. It's saying you're innately good, you just make mistakes sometimes. And he goes on to say, this is why I've told you to be content at heart, but disobedient as well. So be content at heart. Be content with what you know you truly are. But be disobedient to those things that try to catch your attention, that try to lead you down a path that's not good for you. And he also says, acquire my peace within you. So he's not saying here, hey, look, worship me, and through me you can get to the kingdom. He's saying, acquire my peace within you. Do what I've done. You can do what I've done. You can reach the state that I have reached. And acquire my peace within you. Come to that central place and acquire peace within yourself. And he tells us to be on guard. Don't let anyone say, look here, look there, here's the answer, there's the answer. Follow what I've told you and stay true to that central, peaceful self. And it's then at this point that he departs. And we don't know where he goes. He just departs, sort of like exit stage left. And at this point, the disciples, they start to speak up and they're saying, how can we share his teachings? Look at what they did to him. They're going to do the same to us. And it's Mary who steps forward to comfort them and encourage them. She says, do not weep and be distressed, nor let your hearts be irresolute, for his grace will be with you and will shelter you. We should praise his greatness, for he has prepared us and made us true human beings. So again, this idea, true human beings, he's shown us that our true nature is one of good, and he's prepared us to spread this message, to do this work. When Mary had said these things, she turned their heart toward the good, and they began to debate about the words of the Saviour. And the good is something that Jesus has told them in this gospel that is pursuing them. The good has come among you to pursue you. So we're always being pursued by good. We just have to turn our attention to the good. And Mary has turned their hearts back to that notion. And then at this point, when she's consoled and kind of bolstered up the disciples, Peter says, Mary, you were the closest to Jesus. Tell us what he told you that he didn't share with us. And Mary says, I will reveal what is hidden from you. And she goes on to recount that she saw Jesus in a vision. And she asks Jesus, how is it that I can see you? Because obviously, he's dead. So she's like, what's going on? She says, is it my soul? Is it my spirit that I'm perceiving you through? And Jesus says, a person does not see with the soul or with the spirit, rather the mind, which exists between these two, sees the vision, and that is what? And then we're missing 4 pages of the gospel. So we don't know what he was going to say there, but saying that you're not seeing it with your soul or your spirit, you're seeing it with your mind, which is between the two. This translation, the word mind, is coming from the Greek nous, and there are different interpretations of what this might mean. But in this spiritual context, especially given that Jesus is saying it's between the soul and the spirit, the nous is like that inner knowing. It's the intuitive sense. So it includes the intellect of the mind, but it includes that openness of the heart. So when we have those experiences, sometimes that we can't quite explain, but they are uplifting in nature. Maybe you're in prayer, you're in ritual, or it's a scene in nature where you're just taken away and you get this impression. And it's something outside of, say, everyday reality or perception. and your heart is completely open to it, even though it's something that maybe is not explainable at the time. So you might be in nature, but you might sort of get a sense that you know, in the wind, you kind of hear this like affirmation, or perhaps in prayer, you get this really stunning clarity, this real piece of advice that you're just like, whoa, I don't think that was me. Where did that come from? And so he's saying that that's how we see divine vision. That's how we get divine inspiration and guidance. We have our hearts open to the possibility that the divine might want to contact us and have something to say to us. But our mind is coming in and saying, how can we rationalize this moment that's just like unexplainable? We can't explain this. It's not in my everyday reality. So it's somewhere between the heart, what we want, what we long for, and the mind, how we rationalize and how we interpret. And then the gospel goes on. It picks back up again when we have the pages where we're in this dialogue between the soul and the ego. So the ego is saying to the soul, excuse me, like, who are you? Where are you going? I'm in charge. And the soul is saying, I don't think so. And it's this dialogue. The soul tells the ego, you are a mere garment that I wear. Feels like divine light is shining in. I've just closed the blind. So the soul is challenging the ego's sense of reality. It's saying, you're not the real individual. I am. You were born out of fear, shame, lack, guilt, jealousy. I'm born out of the true nature of humanity, which is good, which is love. And the ego is being deconstructed here. And it's something akin to shadow work, where we go into ourselves as humans and we examine ourselves, our actions, our thoughts, our perceptions. And we say, is this true? Can I heal any parts of this? Can I get closer to my true nature? It's important to note here that because of the way the gospel is structured and because of the pages that are missing, we assume that it's Mary Magdalene explaining that she went through this process. But there are some who say it could be interpreted as Jesus explaining his experience during his harrowing of hell. So after his death on the cross, he descended into hell for 3 days. And some say that maybe he was giving Mary Magdalene this teaching, which was perhaps his final lesson, that he went through this process of realizing, oh my gosh, like, that's not the real me, this is the real me. And he's explaining it to Mary Magdalene because he knows she's going to get it. And he's saying, you don't need to wait till death to do this. You can do it now. And so that is one interpretation. So it's either Mary Magdalene saying that she went through this process, or it's Jesus explaining this process to her because he knows that she's going to understand it. And he's prepared those who followed him to be like him, to acquire his peace within them. But either way, I think it's a very, very powerful exchange. And it's at this point that Andrew steps forward and says, I don't think that you're telling the truth. I think you've made this up. I don't think Jesus said this. It's too different from what he said before. And Peter steps up to kind of agree, and they accuse Mary basically of making this up. And Mary says to them, do you think that I would make this up from my heart? And I think it's really interesting that she says that, because we know that the nous is somewhere between our reasoning and our heart space, our want and our reality, our logical, rational self. And so she's saying, I haven't just made this up with my desire. You know, it was a vision that I saw, and it was through the nous. It was the truth. It's at this stage that Levi steps forward and defends Mary Magdalene. And he says, Peter, you've always been quick to temper. Now I see you contending against a woman like the adversaries. So that's a really interesting note there, saying our adversaries, the people who don't follow this path, they contend against women. They don't trust the word of a woman, because at these times in that culture, the word of a woman was not taken as truth. You had to have, I think, 3 witnesses if a woman was to accuse someone of something, whereas a man could just accuse another person and it would be believed if there was proof there. And so again, we have this, in the Bible, Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene, a woman, to say, go and tell everyone I've risen, even though he knows that the word of a woman won't necessarily be taken as truth. And then again here in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, we have him giving this huge teaching, this you can bring heaven on earth, you can overcome your struggles and your suffering through this process to a certain point. This huge teaching he gives to a woman. And then we have Levi saying, our adversaries are the ones who don't believe the word of a woman. So in this stage of early Christianity, we're saying that women are as worthy as men. Goodness, can you believe it? What were they on? And certainly here we are seeing a woman in this gospel step forward as a teacher, as a leader, maybe even as a successor, because without Mary Magdalene bringing their hearts to the good and encouraging them, maybe the disciples would have stayed stuck in that fear state, in that ego part of themselves, instead of saying, let's go out and spread this message. And maybe, Jesus, in this context, in this gospel, he knew that. He was like, I need to give these teachings to Mary because she's going to get them. And I know that she's strong enough to carry on in my absence. I know that. So we have this really interesting point in the history of this spiritual movement and which way it was going to go at this time. And of course, we know that women in the church have been campaigning for a long time, and we do have female priests now. And there's been a debate since the dawn of the church as to whether or not women can be spiritual leaders. And this gospel, again, challenges that. Now, I'm not a religious person, so it doesn't really have any connotations for me personally. But, globally, the way that women are seen, and that women can't do certain things because of their nature or because they're not worthy in the eyes of God, this has repercussions for cultures, for society. And this kind of gospel gives a different message than that. And so again, it's like, how would our world have been if this was the message that was put out? But not only the message, but the way the message was delivered, the vessels through which this message was delivered. If women had been allowed more of a front and center role. This gospel is such an important piece because it's showing us where the minds were at with different topics at this time. And Levi says, assuredly the Saviour's knowledge of her is completely reliable. That is why he loved her more than us. I'm just going to leave that there. Then he says, rather we should be ashamed. We should clothe ourselves with the perfect human, acquire it for ourselves as he commanded us, and announce the good news. So he's saying here, we should do the work that he's told us to do. We should find his peace within us. We should find our soul selves and go out and spread that good news. After he had said these things, they started going out to teach and to preach. And I can just imagine that moment when they've had this kind of heated exchange. Just like a play, I can imagine the lights go off, you hear the footsteps of the actors exit behind the stage, and then it's silent and it's dark, and you don't know what's coming next. Except we do know what came next. We got the Christianity that we got. And I invite you just to imagine, what would the world have been like if we got the teachings of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, not necessarily Christianity? Because in this gospel, it's not a Jesus who's saying you can only go through me and to reach God in heaven. He's saying you can do this yourselves. It's your responsibility. It's your ability to do this. So for me, this gospel, the teachings within it, I strive to live by them in my everyday life. I don't see it as just a dusty old tome to be looked at just through the mind, just through a scholarly lens. I say, how can I benefit from these teachings if I do this work, can I reach a place of peace within myself? And I know that for myself, following these teachings, I have come to a much greater relationship with myself and with the divine. And I know that the divine is there. It's within me, it's without. And so for me, I think that this gospel is just truly a magnificent gift to humanity, especially at this time. And I think so many people who use Mary Magdalene in their teachings really don't discuss this gospel much, if at all. And I think it's such a shame, because this is a potential pathway to inner peace and then flowing that out to those around us. It's a very different teaching from the one that many people grew up with. Whatever culture you're from, right? Christianity just, the church reached out and just covered everything with this message of fear. But this gospel gives us a different choice. If you're interested in going further into working with this gospel, I have my book, The 7 Powers of Mary Magdalene. It's a practical guidebook for working through and with the 7 Powers of Mary Magdalene. That is available. The link will be below. There is also the free 5-day Magdalene Priestess Immersion, and there's also the mailing list as well. So all the links, all the juicy goodies will be down below. So I hope that was illuminating for you. Thank you so much for being with me today. Many blessings.